I have a surprise for you today, Ray says as you enter her green room. So I keep hearing, you reply good-naturedly. I've been waiting all day. Poe and Finn could hardly stop talking about it. Well, it's exciting, Ray says with a shrug. She gets to her feet, and that's when you realize that she's holding something in her hand. Is that a... Your voice catches in your throat as a blue blade jumps out from the hilt in her hand. You can't help but make a small noise of appreciation in the back of your throat as she twirls it around in her hands absent-mindedly. The only other lightsaber you had seen in your life was Kylo's, and it had been bright red, crackling and angry, with little jets of red flame blazing out of the crossguard. Rey's lightsaber was a pale blue, glowing with a soft, steady hum that was almost soothing. I think it might help give you some focus, Rey says at length. I spoke to Leia about it, and she agreed that it was all right. Luke was against it, but Luke is, well, Luke. Yeah, you say appreciatively, although you had no idea what she meant by that. Will I ever meet him? Perhaps, Ray says. He's rarely ever here, but he said the decision was ultimately up to me. She grins sheepishly as she looks up at you. To be honest, he didn't think I was ready for mine either, and at the time, neither did I, but I was ready for it. You just nod, not sure where she's going with this. So, you want to train me with your lightsaber? The blue light flashes against her hazel eyes as she swings the lightsaber out in front of her. No, I want to help you make your own. My own... Your mouth drops open as you stare at her. You mean I'm going to get my own lightsaber? If you can make it, Ray says with a slight chuckle. I have the components, but you're going to have to construct it yourself. Right here? You ask as your eyes sweep the expanse of the small room. But where are the parts? We can't build it in here, Ray says with a smirk, as if this should have been obvious. The humidity in this room is too high to safely build in here. Lightsabers are very sensitive. I have the parts in the magazine, in the place where they work on the proton torpedoes. The conditions in that room actually make it the perfect place to build one. Then lead the way, you say, bowing low in a dramatic gesture as you follow her out of the green room. Have you missed me over the past week? Ray asks as you walk down the corridor. Nah, you say lightly, hitting her arm with the back of your hand to show that you were just joking. Finn and Poe were more than enough company. Good to hear it, Ray replies. Luke and I went to the remains of the Starkiller base to find something you'll need, a large kyber crystal. Before the First Order took over the planet, it was once known as Ilum, and it was the largest source of kyber crystals for the old Jedi Order. That's why the First Order decided to build their base there, I think, to use in that laser weapon they made. You nod your head, but you didn't really know either way. When the Resistance destroyed it, the weapon was mostly charged, so the majority of the planet collapsed into a star, but some of the crust was blasted outward and now orbits the star as a thin asteroid field. I got really lucky and found a chunk that was particularly rich in crystals and happened to have some piping of the perfect material stuck inside as well. She pauses as she greets two guards standing outside a single door, and they let the two of you pass. It was interesting. You had never really seen guards on any part of this base before, and so you knew that whatever was inside this room was definitely of great importance. Inside, you immediately noticed the racks of missiles and crates lining the room, as if they had been cleared away. In the center of the room are two large tables filled with all kinds of parts, most of which look like electronic components. In the center of the first table is what looks like a metal pipe, a little less than a meter long and a little thicker than your staff, with a small hole cut in the center. In the center of the other table was a small pile of pale blue tinted crystals, which you figured must be the kyber crystals. Ray steps over to the first table and motions to the pipe. This is Mandalorian iron. I learned to recognize it when I lived on Jakku, since Ankar paid a premium for it. Considering you're already skilled with your staff, I wanted to get you a material suitable for a little bit of an unconventional design. A double-bladed staff. Are you kidding? You ask. You can feel your hands literally trembling with excitement at your side. Are you talking about making me a lightsaber staff? You're making it, Ray says with a smile. Mandalorian iron is nearly impossible to cut by lightsaber. I know, because I spent all morning cutting it down to size and had to charge my lightsaber's power packs twice. This way, you can still block normally without the fear of it being cut in half by another lightsaber, the way Luke's master once defeated a Sith Lord. Additionally, Mandalorian iron is extremely dense, so you won't have to change your fighting style much since the pipe will have a similar weight as your own staff, unlike the light materials most choose to construct their own lightsabers. I took advantage of the extra material and added it to my own lightsaber. She holds out her hilt and points out 6 small strips of the material arranged around the blade end. Incidentally, it still makes a useful weapon on its own, even without the blades activated. Since we're working with the pipe, building the lightsaber is going to be a test of your force skill, because all of the internal components will have to be inserted through the ends or the hole in the center and joined using the force. She looks up at you. Do you know how to read a circuit diagram? I don't think so. Don't worry, Ray says confidently. I'll walk you through it. All you need to worry about is the overall design. Considering you use the force to deploy your staff to its full length, I figured you would prefer a similar design for your lightsaber as well. Both Luke's lightsaber and mine use mechanical toggles to activate the blade, but I'll show you how to make a force-activated trigger for yours. Awesome, you say, biting your lip in excitement. For once, you didn't regret letting Ray inside your head. Not if it meant she knew exactly what kind of awesome presents to get you. Before we start, you need to choose a crystal, she tells you as she leads you over to the second table. The rest of the design is going to depend on its shape. As she talks, she spreads them out over the table and you look over each one in turn. For your weapon to be a proper extension of yourself, you have to find a crystal that's attuned to who you are in the Force. Technically, any of these crystals will do, but since kyber crystals draw the majority of their power from the Force, they are most powerful when they are tuned to you. When you find it, you'll know. I'll wait outside so that my powers won't interfere with yours. Just call me back in when you've found it. Ray steps outside and you step up to the table, letting your hands hover over the table of crystals as you close your eyes. You pass your hands slowly over the crystals in a slow, clockwise circle, feeling a small pull to one corner. You pass over them in another circle, feeling the same tingling sensation spreading through your fingers. On the third pass, you stop and reach down to where you feel the strongest pull, closing your hand around a crystal that seems to vibrate in your hands. You open your eyes and look down at the crystal as you scoop it up in your palm. It has 2 distinct lobes, and right where the two are joined at the center, there is a small crack, almost as though the 2 lobes were trying to pull apart at the center. You float it into the air just above your palm, and the force of the crystals fighting each other causes them to spin and tumble in midair. You weren't sure if it was normal for kyber crystals to be so conflicted, but then again, maybe it was just further proof that you yourself were conflicted right down to your core. There was no way this could be a coincidence. Ray steps back in and looks at the crystal spinning above your palm, and she tilts her head to the side strangely as she watches you. That's interesting, she says at length. I had a feeling it might be that one. Honestly, I'm a bit anxious to see what kind of blade it produces. Before we can start assembly, you're going to have to split the crystal and use the force to do it, but it shouldn't be too difficult considering the nature of that crystal. If it's split any other way, the 2 halves will no longer be linked and the force toggle will be impossible to produce. Come, Sit with me. She pulls 2 cushions out from under the tables and places them on the floor. You sit on one and Rey takes the other, sitting across from you, relaxing with her eyes closed and motioning for you to do the same. Float the crystal like you did earlier and try to feel every aspect of it in the Force. Feel how the Force flows through it and where the crystal's conflict lies. That will be the proper place to divide it. Still the crystal as much as you can, then visualize every bond along the crack gently separating as the crystal comes apart. There, just like that. You open your eyes and see that the 2 lobes have now separated and are now orbiting one another above your hand, the earlier tension you felt in them gone, now that they were separated into their 2 distinct halves. Good, Rey says. That means they're still linked through the Force, so the 2 blades will act as one. Here, put them in here for now. We won't need them until the very end. She holds out a small bowl as you float them into it, placing them gently inside, and you hear a small vibration as they sit side by side in the bowl. Rey pulls a 3rd table from the wall and places it perpendicular to the other 2, forming a U shape as she places a box filled with tools on it. This will be our workbench, she explains. I found that the easiest way to keep track of all the parts and make sure you didn't miss anything is to lay out the circuit diagram and just place each part where it belongs on it. She pulls a folded sheet of flimsipast off the first table and it fills the workbench as she unfolds it and lays it out. On it is a complex set of lines, circles, squiggles, and other symbols, all connected by some logic that you didn't understand. Next to each component were labels like energy gate, boosting coils, and inductive latch, although none of them gave you any insight into what it was you were looking at, although you knew it had to be the circuit diagram for what would be your lightsaber. At the very least, you could tell that it would have 2 blades. Since the drawing seemed symmetrical, the symbols on one side of the center fold mirrored on the other. Okay, I know this looks intimidating, but I'll walk you through each part and you'll understand by the end, okay? Rey asks, and you nod your head. She points to a group of identical symbols clustered at the center of the drawing, where there are groups of parallel lines of varying lengths labeled main power storage. This is where everything starts. While kyber crystals draw some power from you through the Force itself, it's not enough to form stable lightsaber blades, so we have to use power cells to boost and focus the emitter matrix. Go ahead and place them. She gestures to a stack of copper-colored rings on the first table. You place them at the center of the diagram on their corresponding symbols. Next we have the power conservation circuit, she says, as she traces a path from the power cells through some loops, parallel lines, and a couple of other symbols you didn't quite know how to describe until she trails back to the power cells. This cycle unused power back to the cells and allows you to keep your lightsaber on almost indefinitely without draining the power cells, unless you're fighting against another lightsaber or trying to cut through any material capable of conducting energy, she says as she nods to the pipe on the table on your left. We'll need to build a circuit for each side, so if you haven't noticed already, I've split the components for duplicate circuits between the 2 tables, Rey explains. The conversation components are on the corners closest to you since we have to attach those to the power cells directly before inserting the whole assembly into the pipe. She nods towards the clusters of components at the corners, and you see that they're a pair of thick silver rings joined by wires looped into tight coils, studded with a few small gold beads. You hold up one piece and try to compare it to the drawing. If the looping squiggle in the drawing represented the coiled wire, then the few gold beads in the wire must correspond to the pairs of parallel lines drawn across the wire at various points, and the 2 rings were the other symbols you couldn't identify. Satisfied you were starting to figure this out, you place the 2 assemblies in the middle of the circuit loops that represented them, and look up at Rey to see that she looks pleased. See? She asks happily. I told you it will all make sense once you could see what the drawing represents. Starting to get it, you mutter under your breath. Though, can I ask, why is everything shaped like a ring? There isn't one part here that isn't either a really thin wire or a ring. That's because we'll need a hole through the middle for the force toggle connecting the two crystals, Ray explains. Before we close up the lightsaber, you'll install the mechanism yourself through the hole in the center of the staff. She traces a line across the drawing with wavy lines where it looked like it hopped over every other line crossed, connecting the two symbols at the far edges that you assumed represented the two halves of the crystal. Next, there's the field stabilizing circuit, she continues. This keeps the current through the blade emitter stable, even when you're cutting through something, contacting another lightsaber blade, or deflecting a blaster bolt. Ray smirks as she sees your expression. Yes, that's something you can do with the lightsaber if you're focused enough to sense the bolt before it's fired. The circuitry for the stabilizers is at the center of each table, but we'll have to bend those into shape around the crystals once we're ready for them. You place the pairs of long, wispy, silvery wires and golden rings she indicated onto their respective loops, the ends of the wires stretching off the edges of the table. Finally, there's the actual blade circuits, she says, tracing the outermost loops in the diagram, the ones that pass through the crystals. These send power to the crystals and the emitter matrices. Each emitter matrix is highly polarized, so it's vitally important that they be connected correctly. Otherwise, the lightsaber could explode the first time you try to activate it, since the power cells store an incredible amount of energy. I've marked the power leads red and white to match the red and white terminals of the power cells so they can't be mixed up. The internal circuits are on the far ends of the tables and the emitters are on the edges. We'll get to the force toggle when it's time. You place all the components, more circuitry, and two large heavy discs on the diagram in their appropriate spots and take a step back. Sitting on the table before you are all of the components for your lightsaber, minus the outer staff and the crystals. You bite your lip as a spark of exhilaration races through you, and you can't remember the last time you were this excited about anything. Exciting, isn't it? Ray asks, and you just nod your head. I felt the same way when Luke walked me through creating mine. Are you ready to start? Born ready, you say eagerly, turning to face her. All right, then let's start with the power cells, she says as she points to them. Slot them together in 2 stacks of 4 cells each. She pulls a dull-looking wire and what looks like a welding contact from the toolbox. Looking at the power cells, you realize that they have shaped edges that allow them to be put together in only one way, red face to white face, with small grooves that lined up to make 2 long grooves once they were put together. You hold one stack tightly together in your hands and hold it out to Ray, who seals the cells together by welding along the 2 grooves in the sides, leaving a silver line where the grooves had been. You held out the other stack in a similar manner as she welds that one together as well. Next, we join the conversion assemblies to the power cells, she tells you. They also double as your charging contacts, so make sure you attach them so that the thicker ring connects to the white contact. You slip a power cell stack through the loops of wire, making sure that the white contact faced toward the thicker ring as Ray said, then instinctively press the rings into the contacts of the power cells. You were only mildly surprised that they snap together with a satisfying click. You look up at Ray, who just nods back in approval. You proceed to do the same with the other power cells and conversation assembly, setting them back down on the table when you're done. You look up in time to see Ray retrieving the bowl containing the 2 halves of your crystal. Next, you'll have to wind the stabilizer field wire around the crystals, she explains. The stabilizer fields have to be connected to both power sources for maximum stability, so you'll need to wind the first one in a way that leaves room for the second winding and the emitter winding. I have the tools for it here if you want it, but it's more precise to do it with the Force, and I figure that's the way you'd want to do it. You smirk and nod your head. She really did know you. Okay, so take a wire and a crystal. Place the wire on one side of the pointed end so that the center of the wire rests on a crystal edge. The center is marked with a black line. You call the crystal and wire to you using the force and align them in front of you, just like Ray said, the black center line resting on the edge of the crystal. Now twist both ends down and around the crystal and make sure to leave room for the second wire and the emitter winding. I am apparently much smarter than I look, you murmur to yourself as you realize that you were really constructing your own lightsaber. You remembered when Kylo had proudly told you all about how he had made his, but that hadn't seemed like a big deal to you at the time. If he had showed it to you now, you would have a lot more questions for him and a lot more of an appreciation for how he built it. You close your eyes and take a deep breath out, visualizing the crystal and the wire before you. You will the wire to bend down smoothly on both sides, tightly hugging the crystal faces as you turn the wire down both sides of the crystal, finally reaching the bottom and letting the long ends of the wire hang free. You call the second wire to you and align it 1/3 of the way around the crystal, setting the center against a crystal edge. You wind the ends down and around the crystal, closely following the first line, making sure to leave a gap between them the whole way down, letting the ends hang free once you've reached the bottom. You open your eyes and see that the wires have wrapped just as you visualize them, thin silvery lines twisting around the crystal. Good job, Ray tells you. Now let's wind the emitter power coil and attach the energy gate. Then we can do the same for the other crystal. Ray floats the emitter circuit to you and aligns the small disc in the middle of it to the bottom of the crystal. She nods towards you to signal that you had to do the rest yourself, and you wind the gold wire up and around the crystal through the wide stripe you had left, holding what was left of the wires upright in the air. Ray picks up one of the emitter discs and separates a gold disc from the bottom and holds it out to you. You float it to you and see that it's actually two thin discs separated by two small pegs, one of which protrudes through one of the discs. Is this the energy gate you mentioned? Yes. Bring the hole down over the tip of the crystal with a peg on top and press it down as far as it will go, Ray explains. Once you've got it, wrap the red tipped wire around the peg. I'll do the final weld to join it to the lower gate. As you press down the disc and wrap the wire around the peg, Ray walks over with the welder, fusing the other wire to the lower gate on the side opposite the peg and locking the crystal into the energy gate. Ray calls over the two gold rings that were grouped with the stabilizer wires and pulls a strip of measuring tape from her pocket, draping it down from the energy gate. She cuts one end of each wire some distance down and welds on the gold rings. Set the whole assembly back on the workbench and we'll do the other one. You float the assembly back to the workbench and set it down gently. Once the assembly was settled, you retrieved the other half of the crystal and repeated the entire process of wrapping the wires and setting the energy gate circuit, with Ray doing the final welds. Once it was done, you set it down on the workbench as well and braced yourself against one of the side tables, exhausted by the sheer amount of force that you were using to manipulate the objects in front of you. Don't worry, we're almost done, Ray tells you. All that's left to do is attach the power cells and set the emitter matrices, then create the force toggle. We can attach the power cells by hand so you can save what's left of your concentration for just setting everything inside the staff and creating the force toggle. Just follow my lead. You follow her back to the workbench, where Ray picks up the gold rings on one of the assemblies and grabs a power cell. You do the same and mirror her actions, attaching one gold ring to the thinner silver ring on the red face of the cell and letting the other hang free for now. Once you set the ring, Ray places a small wooden block on the bench and places her power cell on one side of it, and you place yours on the other side. Ray grabs the free hanging ring on your side and slides it between the block and the power cell and motions for you to do the same. After you place your ring, Ray grabs the end of the red-tipped free hanging wire on her side and stretches it over to your power cell, cutting it just beyond the gold ring and then welding it onto the ring. She did the same for the remaining 3 wires, attaching the appropriately colored tip to its corresponding ring on the other side. She pulled out 2 more wires and welded them to the rings on the red faces and the lower discs of the energy gate to complete the power circuit, removing the block and stepping back when she's finished. Now we mount the whole thing inside the staff and attach the emitter matrices. She continues, this will require both of our concentration, so do you want to hold the staff or mount the assembly? You were tired, but then again, this was your lightsaber, and you wanted to do the hard part yourself. There was no way you could brag about making your own lightsaber if you had Rey do all of the hard parts for you. I'll mount the thing. Okay, Rey says. When you get it all the way in, I'll pulse the power cells to snap the wires into place so it holds its shape. Rey calls forth the staff shell and positions it vertically in front of her. You call the assembly off of the table and lift it, slowly turning every component in one cohesive unit, taking care not to twist or bend the stabilizer wires. You slowly lower it into your staff, stopping once you sense that the assembly was properly centered. Rey reaches a small tool into the hole in the center of your staff, and you heard 2 small electrical whines as you felt the wires straightening and stiffening to support the crystals. When she was done, you floated the staff to the workbench with you and set it down. Picking up an emitter matrix, you noticed that the matrix was also rimmed with Mandalorian iron and realized that this probably took a long time for Rey to set up for you. After inspecting the bottom surface, you noticed a peg and a small hole that seemed to match up with the energy gate, as well as a large hollow in the center to accommodate the tip of the kyber crystal. The small hole had a white ring around it, while the peg had a red ring around it, corresponding to the power terminals. You double-check that the white-tipped wire is attached to the gate's peg before snapping the matrix onto the energy gate, matching the pegs to their respective holes, white to white and red to red. You do the same for the other end, and the staff sits before you on the bench, almost ready. Okay, you breathe out as you relax your shoulders. I think I'm ready for the 4th toggle. We'll have to go back to the green room for that part, Rey explains. Now that everything is safely inside the casing, the humidity won't be a problem. The weapons technician forbade me to install the toggle in here since the first pulse from the Nova relays could set off one of the torpedoes, she says as she motions to the racks lining the walls. You gulp and nod your head as you grab your staff and follow her out the door, nodding to the 2 guards outside the door as you leave. Once you arrive at the green room, Rey goes to a small bag she had placed off to one side and pulls out 2 narrow green crystals with long wires attached to each tip. These are Nova crystals, she explains. They're predominantly used as weapon fuses throughout the galaxy due to their ability to emit a high-energy pulse when they're connected as Nova relays, although some systems opt to use them as a form of currency. This is a grade of crystal unsuitable for either purpose, but perfect for your lightsaber's force trigger. Even though these crystals aren't sensitive to the Force the same way kyber crystals are, you can subtly change their properties by using the Force, so they can function as a lightsaber toggle and as blade controllers once you become more familiar with the crystals and how they behave connected to the kyber crystals. Thread them through the center hole and then knot 1 wire around each of the discs under the crystals. Once they're attached, they form a unique, force-sensitive version of a Nova relay that only exists because the 2 halves of the crystal are still joined through the Force. All you have to do to activate the lightsaber is to will it to come on through your kyber crystal, and the resulting changes in the Nova crystals will complete the circuit and allow the power to flow. Once power is flowing through the crystals, it will continue to flow until you will it off or lose control of it. At first, you should only be able to control the blade's strength, but in time you may learn to vary the blade length, which will be helpful if you are fighting against another lightsaber. That's something you'll have to learn on your own, though, as you become more familiar with it. Are you ready to install it? You nod and she hands you the crystals. You levitate the staff in front of you and slowly thread the wires in through the center hole, visualizing the ends of the wires passing through the narrow holes in the power assemblies and wrapping around the disc under each crystal half before doubling back on themselves in a secure knot, ensuring each line was stretched tight between the two discs. As you finish this, Ray hands you what looks to be a small standard power socket with 4 wires coming out one end. 2 red, 2 white. You'll need this in order to charge your lightsaber later, but the cells have enough power to do an initial activation, she explains. It's pretty simple, just red to red and white to white. Just wrap the ends around the hooks where I welded the terminals. You snap the socket into the center hole and guide the wires to the terminals with what concentration you had left, wrapping the ends around the terminal hooks like Ray said, and just like that, it was done. You had finally built your very own lightsaber. Are you ready? Ray asks, and you gulp nervously as you feel the cool metal beneath your hands. This was your new staff. You had made this with your own 2 hands, and it would be fueled purely by your strength and trust in the Force alone. If there was any tangible proof of how far you had come in your Force training, this was it. You close your eyes and hold the staff out in front of you, your left palm facing down and your right palm facing up. You try to will the blade, pushing first with your hands and then with your mind, but nothing happens. You open your eyes and try to push, trying to summon the blade with all your might, but it doesn't flow. You look back up at Ray nervously, who merely bites her lip as she looks back at you. I'm sorry, she says after a moment, looking visibly ashamed. I thought you were ready. I shouldn't have. No, you say quickly, shaking your head. No, I'm ready. I can do this. Just give me a second. You start to feel frustrated and angry, and for the first time in a while, you don't shy away from it. You had tried summoning your lightsaber with pure strength from the light side of the Force alone, but maybe you really were dark after all. You pushed it, willed it, twisting your insides into knots as you mentally exerted yourself trying to make it work, but nothing happened. It didn't budge. Light and dark, you tell yourself. You're not pure enough to walk solely along with the light side of the Force, but you're not venal enough to surrender solely to the dark side either. My power of the Force comes from Kylo's teaching. It comes from Rey's. My Force is neither light nor dark alone. It's both, just like my crystal. I need to draw my power from both. You can feel a hum, and for a moment you don't even realize it's from your hands as you open your eyes. The staff seems to still for a moment. You can feel the slight vibration under your hands. You can hear the hum in your ears, but you can't see a blade. Maybe I assembled it wrong, you say nervously, and you almost drop the lightsaber as a jet of light shoots out from either side of the staff. You screw your eyes shut tightly, afraid to see what color it was. Was it red? Was it blue? You hear Rey murmur in surprise, and your eyes fly open, only to be met with a rich amber hue. Is it supposed to look like that? You ask breathlessly as you stare down at your lightsaber. It's glowing in front of you with a steady, resilient hum that sounds almost defiant to your ears. The light is distinctly amber, a pure mix between gold and orange. Shouldn't it be blue? Or red? Why is it this color? Luke told me something like this might happen, Rey says, tilting her head to the side. It is extremely rare, though. We still don't know why exactly kyber crystals manifest colors the way they do, but certain colors are well understood to have specific associations. The 3 colors that Luke knows well are blue, green, and red, although his master told him that Jedi of certain specialties used to wield lightsabers of different colors depending on their role in the order. A kyber crystal is uncolored before it is activated, but once it is, it's forever imprinted with the nature of its wielder at the time of the lightsaber's creation. Most Jedi's lightsabers were blue, as they were created during the innocence of childhood, and the crystal grew with them, moving to larger hilts through the years, only ever changing color if they lost their original lightsaber and had to make a new one, and had a different view of the Force. Usually, blue is the default color of Jedi determined to stay on the light side, while green was a sign of those who were more willing to explore the boundaries. And red, you ask hesitantly? although you're pretty sure you know the answer to this one already. Red is either a sign of an artificial crystal or one marred by the violence of the dark side, Rey says firmly. Amber, though, if I remember correctly, was the mark of a truly gray Jedi who usually had a diminished place in the Order because they chose to embrace elements of the dark side in the name of balance, although I think a couple occasionally ascended to the Council. It doesn't really matter anymore since the old Jedi Council is no longer around, but it's still incredible that the blades manifested amber. It means you stand directly in the middle between the two sides. You are perfectly balanced between the light side and the dark. She tears away from the blade's rich hue to meet your eyes. It's quite rare. Oh, you say quietly. All this time you had been willing yourself to believe that you could be either one or the other, but was this proof you needed to accept that you were split evenly between them? Right now, your crystals are getting attuned to you, Rey explains. As you meditate on them and form a bond, they will become more and more powerful as they draw more and more strength from you. Eventually, you won't even have to consciously will your lightsaber to do anything. It'll simply react precisely as you need it to in the moment. Uh-huh, you reply, too engrossed in your lightsaber to focus on what she's saying. We have company, Rey says suddenly, but you're too busy turning your staff over and over in your hands to notice, doing it slowly so as to not accidentally drop it and burn off a limb. She just laughs and lets you get used to handling it as she walks over and opens the door. Whoa. You can recognize Poe's voice from the doorway, and you crack a grin but don't look over at them as you turn it over and over in your hands faster and faster. Holy shit, Finn exclaims, and you laugh audibly at that. Why is it yellow? It's amber, you call out, slowly bringing the staff to a stop. You hold it horizontally in front of you, holding it firmly in your right fist, letting the blade stream out from both ends. I told you she could do it, Rey says, clapping her hands together excitedly as she watches you. We never doubted her for a second, did we, Finn? Poe asks, hitting Finn gently in the shoulder. Not for a second, Finn replies, and you grin as you close your eyes and imagine the blades contracting. There's a slight whoosh, and the bright amber glow suddenly fades from the room. You smile to yourself and take your regular staff out of your pouch, slipping your lightsaber into it instead. I'm going to have to give you one of my belts, Rey says, gesturing to where she had attached her own lightsaber, and you nod your head excitedly. True, this pouch had been a present from Kylo, but it had gotten to be a bit much carrying it around everywhere you went. And yes, maybe his influence had helped you get you here, much as Rey's had, but this was your power now. It was your power that was fueling the lightsaber that was in front of you, but as you looked at the three smiling faces in front of you, you knew that you couldn't have done it alone. Thank you, you say firmly. All of you. You sigh and spread your arms. Okay, you can come hug me now. Finn immediately rushes forward in a big bear hug, and you wrap your arms around him as he sways you back and forth as he hugs you. Rey is immediately right behind him, pulling you into a firm embrace. I knew you could do it, she whispers in your ear. Only because I have such a great teacher, you whisper back, and she holds you at arm's length for a moment as she releases you. You all turn to Poe, who just holds up his hands. I don't know, he says teasingly. You're still holding that staff. You stick your tongue out at him, so you pass it off to Rey, and he comes at you in a rush, bending his knees as he swoops down and picks you up, lifting you off the ground. You shut your eyes and squeal in a mixture of delight and surprise as he spins you around, your hands resting on his shoulders. Let me down, you squeal after a few moments, your brain starting to get dizzy, and he sets you back down on your feet, holding your shoulders steady to make sure you don't fall. You can hear laughter all around you, and your nose wrinkles up as you laugh, biting your lip as you look up at him. You good? He asks, and you push his arm away playfully as you step to the side. I'm good, you reply, grinning up at him. You let out a deep breath, and you can honestly say that your cheeks are starting to hurt from all the smiling. You can't even remember the last time you felt this good in, well, ever. So, food? Food? Who's hungry? That would be me, Finn says as he heads to the door. And me, Ray says, immediately trailing after him. You look to Poe, who gestures for you to go ahead, and you end up walking side by side with him in the halls as Finn and Ray joke and laugh ahead of you. Thank you, you say as you look up at him. He raises his eyebrows and looks surprised. For what? For what? You echo mockingly. For everything. Seriously. Not just for the flying lessons, but you were the one who brought me and Annie here to begin with, and I can't thank you enough for that. He shakes his head. I was just following orders. Orders or not, you were still the one who had to convince me to come, you insist. So just let me thank you so we can get this moment over with. Oh, Poe says, grinning slightly. Are we having a moment? Nope, you reply curtly. You just ruined it.